Hello everybody, I'm David and welcome to Removing the Veil. This is going to be part 4 of my series To Hell with Purity Culture. Now in this video, I'm going to dive into the purity code, the beginning of purity culture, and the Levitical Law in the book of Leviticus. So, I'm not going to dive into the previous video, so I advise you to please check out part 1, part 2, and part 3 before continuing in this one. But now to continue on, purity culture is a demand that is given of by Christians desiring a biblical world, desiring the world to be biblical, and for people to live a biblical life. But I tell you, that is something that is not of God to ask for. And I know people are going, whoa, David, why are you saying this? Should we desire a biblical nation? Should we desire people to live biblical lives? Shouldn't we desire biblical marriage? Shouldn't we desire people to walk according to the Bible? No, no, of course not, because not everything that is in the Bible is spoken from the mouth of God. Not everything that is biblical is Christ-like. And I think that is something that we really need to get our heads around. The Bible is not the Word of God. Like I've said in a previous video, Jesus Christ is the Word of God. That's mentioned in John chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning was the Word. Any time in the New Testament that the Word is spoken in Logos. It is spoken of Jesus Christ and the message, or the source of the message brought forth by the Word, Logos. So, in continuing from there, let's look at Leviticus chapter 15. Now, I don't want to read all of it because it would take a long time to read, and I don't want to bore you to death. But I advise you to go ahead and pull out your Bibles and check out Leviticus 15. The first verse all the way to verse 15 is dealing with a man with a bodily discharge. It is talking about any discharge from a man's body makes that individual unclean. And from the moment that the discharge ends, he has to cleanse himself, and it actually would be a 7-day cleanse, and on the 8th day he has to present to the priest an offering for a sin offering and a burnt offering, and in order for him to be forgiven of his sin for having a bodily discharge. Now, anything that he's wearing is unclean. Anything that he lays on becomes unclean, or sits on becomes unclean. Anything that he touches needs to be either washed or destroyed. Any other person who touches him, or anything that he has touched or that's been on him, becomes unclean, and they're unclean until sundown, which is they have to bathe until then. Now, going from verse 16 to verse 18, this is a seminal discharge from a male's penis. If he has this, and it's not a natural discharge as if he was having sex in any kind of way, it's just if he's just having a discharge from his penis, he has to clean himself until sundown, and then afterwards, he has to after the evening, he has to present an offering for his sin for having a seminal discharge, and so be a sin offering and a burnt offering. And anyone who touches him becomes unclean until sundown. If they have to do ritual washing, if it touches anything, again, anything that he touches is unclean. If he has sex with a woman, she's now unclean. And so, notice, bodily discharge is semen discharge. The bodily discharge is unclean for 7 days. A penis discharge, unclean until sundown. Both are unnatural, so they're not normal. So since that's not normal, then it's a sin. Now, let's go from verse 18 to verse 33. This is a little interesting. A woman who is on her period is unclean. She is unclean for until she's off of it. And once it ends, then she has to go through a 7-day cleansing. And on the 8th day, she has to present an offering to the priest, a sin offering and a burnt offering. And while she is doing this, whatever she touches, whatever she wears, is unclean. Whoever touches her or anything that she has touched becomes unclean. If a man were to have sex with her, he is now unclean, but only until sundown. But she's unclean for 7 days after the period ends. Now, if she has a discharge along with that, it adds on and is considered as unclean as her premenstrual cycle. So a woman is considered to be unnatural and unnormal. She's not normal nor she's natural if she's on her period. Yet, let's think about this. A man with a seminal discharge. That's not normal. That's not good. But for some reason, that's not considered as unclean as a woman on her normal period. So if we start looking at the purity code is a little bit more lenient of the male superiority in this culture. And women who are considered second-class citizens are already to be considered abnormal unto men. And men get a little bit, they get away with more than the women do. The purity code leans more toward privileged males, and women have to fight for their rights. Just think about that. So if a woman is already who's suffering, having their normal period, depending on what kind of person, not every woman's period begins or ends the same. Some women have shorter periods than others. Some women suffer with longer periods. In today's culture, in today's world, that is the way it is, and I'm sure that's the way it was then. So imagine a woman who's already suffering through a hard period to begin with. It's considered to be abnormal. Can't be around anybody, not even her husband or her children. And then she's having to bathe for 7 days. And it's presenting to God a sin offering. As my period makes me a sinner? She's only normal in between periods, which is not a very long time. So let's think about that, guys, for a second. How biblical this is. We all want a biblical world, but imagine if we brought this back into today. And if a man were to have sex with his wife during her period, he's unclean. We need to think about this as well. A woman who's given birth to a son, after the birth cycle ends, that means even after the bleeding, she probably goes through weeks of bleeding after having a child, if not months of bleeding, and getting rid of what's ever left of the birth effect. Then she has to bathe for 7 days. While having a baby, she's having to nurse. There's a lot of crap that's going on here. And then she has to present a offering on the 8th day, because she is for a sin offering and a burnt offering for the Lord, because of the sin of the mess of childbirth. If she's had a daughter, it's 2 weeks. Well, what's the difference? Except the gender. That's something that we need to think about. The difference here is the gender. And now we all say, but God gave them that law. But they asked for it. They asked for this. This isn't that this is God's will to teach these people, the Israelites, that this is what you're asking for. So this is what you're going to get. And so I advise you to read it in Exodus and read it in its context, and you'll get that this is not something that God technically wanted. In the New Testament, the Bible even says that God found fault with this law. God found fault with this law. The only thing that Jesus even said was good about the law was that it was for him, it pointed toward him, and that the love law was what was important. The law of love. And that's the only thing that Jesus pulled out of there. Says, this is what you need, the law of love. The rest of that stuff is not of love, and it's something that we should not promote. So, if we're looking at desiring a biblical world, imagine that this is what we're asking for. This is what we're demanding people to do when we say, I want a biblical world. No, we want a Christ-like world. We want Christ-like behavior. We don't want biblical behavior. Because, let's go back. Sharia law is more of biblical. Let's think about it. The stoning of people who commit sins. Even if it's thievery or adultery. Jesus says to look upon a woman is to lust after her. You commit adultery in your heart. You deserve death then. To have hate towards somebody, to be angry for no real good reason, is considered to be murder. And that requires death. And this is what we're crying out for. When we cry out for a biblical world. So, like going into chapter 17, you got the blood atonement. Okay, all right, and it even talks about that we in verse 14 that we should not eat. That we should eat anything with blood in it, because that is a sin. But we all order like rare steaks or something like that. That would be considered a sin and something that we shouldn't do. Now, even chapter 18 deals with immoral relations. Now, this is like, revealing your sister's nakedness, revealing your father's wife's nakedness. Now, that's not your mother, but that's his other wife that he has. And you cannot touch her nakedness either. Now, granted, I agree with this. We really just shouldn't do that. But also, think about how many wives this guy has. How many sisters, you have sisters and you have brothers and all that. You got tons of them. And because he has like numerous wives. And not to mention the concubines that's on the side. We ask for biblical marriage. Okay, well, that's biblical marriage to have a decent number of wives, and not only that, like a couple of hundred sex slaves, concubines. And normally they have the wives are only for procreation. The sex slaves are for pleasure. So they're enjoying more of the sex slaves than they are the wives. And so if you think about this, that's biblical marriage, guys, and that's what we're asking for. So going into all this, I want to dive into chapter 18, starting with verse 19. It says, also, you shall not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness during her menstrual impurity. So, don't approach a woman who's on her menstrual impurity. And of course, you shall not have intercourse with your neighbor's wife to defile her, to defile yourself with her. So to be defiled with her. So, first of all, women didn't really have much of a say-so. So the man's defiled because he's having sex with her. They don't think about her purity or anything that's good about her. It's just, okay, man, I don't want you to make yourself impure. It should be out of love that we shouldn't do this for your brother. It should be out of love for your neighbor's wife that you wouldn't want to do this. It should be out of love for your own wife that you wouldn't want to do this. But no, it's just so that you don't be defiled with her. So, let's just continue on here. You shall not lie with a male as one lies with a female. It is an abomination. So, again, we're asking for biblical marriage. We're asking for a biblical world. But in this time, let's think about it. The purity code is not for the sake of actually loving and caring, but it's out of the sake of keeping your own purity. It was also more beneficial for the man than it was the woman. It was all based on male superiority and male privilege. Women didn't have a say-so. I mean, if you think about in the book of Genesis, during the time of Sodom and Gomorrah, when the two angels came in to, because they were getting ready to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and they come in, they're in the streets. Lot says, "Hey, come in here. Don't be out there on the streets," because Lot knows what's going to happen. Suddenly, it says the whole city of men came up, banged on the doors, says, "Give us your visitors. We want to have sex with those men." Lot says, "No, don't do this heinous thing. Take my daughters who have never known a man." So that's biblical then. I'm going to give my virgin daughters to you to ravish them however you please. Have your way with it. So what if they end up dead? 9 times out of 10, they do end up dead. And for the sake of these men. Now, we're thinking that, because homosexuality is such a terrible, bad thing. That was not the case. They did this to any visitor that was an outsider. So if it was a woman, they did this to any, if it was a woman, a child. Sodom and Gomorrah would have parties. In the book of Joshua, it talks about they would have crazy parties with their neighbors. And they would take their daughters, their boys and girls, and they would take their boys and girls, and they would just have a big orgy and just rape these children. Then they didn't see nothing wrong with it. And they would ravish and steal and beat down any person that was on the outside because of their wealthy culture. They were a very wealthy culture, and this is what they did. So it was dealing with hospitality. And in fact, any time that Jesus mentioned Sodom and Gomorrah, it was about being hospitable. Anytime that Ezekiel talked about Sodom and Gomorrah, it was about the sin of not being hospitable. I challenge you to check that and look it up. It had nothing to do with homosexuality, because nobody imagined a man actually being in love with another man, or a woman being in love with another woman. In fact, there's nothing mentioned about women, because women didn't have rights. They didn't say a woman shouldn't lie with a woman. Nothing was said about that. So it all dealt with male superiority and the culture. They couldn't imagine a man taking the place of a woman and being treated like a woman. It was a disgrace unto the other man. Homosexuality wasn't even thought of. It didn't exist in that time, because they just could not fathom the idea that a man would make a man in their culture seem that way. Because during wartime, it was not uncommon for the Israelites, if they were the victors, in all Middle East, but especially, but even in the Israelite culture, that they would take the defeated men and anal rape them for shame. It was not uncommon. You can check your history. It happened quite often in all Middle Eastern culture in that time. It was just a way of shaming them, and that person, it's like just kind of like throwing salt on the wound of somebody who's already defeated. Now I'm being treated this way, so my shame is added on to. But this is definitely going to lead into another video series. So I advise you to please keep on checking this out. I challenge you to think about this, and to really think about it. I will do more on this after ending the purity culture series. But this is what we're talking about. Purity culture, and where it comes from, and how shameful it is to throw it and push it on society, especially on Christians, and especially on females. Because we're asking for something that we don't know of. We don't understand the culture during this time. And I'm not beaten down the culture, because this is all evolved over time and into different cultures. Things are not the same. We can't read the Bible through the lens of today. You have to understand what they're thinking of back then. So I thank you guys, and God bless you. Uh, Please check out my other videos and subscribe to this channel. And thank you. God bless.